He was a decorated state trooper, calm, disciplined, unshakable. One rainy night, he responded to a murder call in a quiet town. Radioed in with just 3 words, Unit 412. I see. And then vanished without a trace. For 11 years, his name faded, his case went cold, until a rusted-out car in a forgotten junkyard was opened, and what they found inside changed everything. Because Ryker didn't just disappear, he left something behind, something buried, something watching. The rain came down in ribbons that night, not in sheets, not in a storm, just steady, slicing, cold. The kind of rain that seems to want to wash everything away. It slicked the blacktop and misted the glow of the high beams as State Trooper Alan Ryker pulled off the highway and into the narrow gravel road that led toward the Holloway residence. His patrol cruiser idled low, headlights scanning the rows of bare trees that clung to the edge of Black Ridge like teeth. Before we step deeper into the dark, where the rain never stops and the truth sleeps beneath the rust, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support isn't just a number on a screen. It's a porch light left on for the lost, a signal that someone's still awake out there. Every click keeps the story alive. Every share pulls another voice out of the static. You are the reason the search doesn't end when the trail goes cold. Thank you for keeping the light burning for those who never made it home. The windshield wipers carved out rhythmic arcs of visibility. Beyond them, darkness. Beyond that, something else. Ryker radioed and his voice was calm, as always. A man who'd spent 15 years wearing the badge didn't spook easily. He confirmed arrival at the scene. Domestic disturbance turned homicide. Initial call-in made by a neighbor. No suspects on site, no visible weapons. He was alone. Backup was en route, but at least 30 minutes out. Rural calls were always like this. Long drives, short fuses, nothing new. The dispatcher's reply was clipped by static. The signal out there past the hills, beyond the tree line, was never strong. But there was nothing in her voice to raise alarm. Just procedure. Ryker responded with a brief 10-4, then opened the door and stepped out into the wet, indifferent night. The house stood hunched at the end of the lane, porch light flickering as if unsure whether to hold on or surrender to the dark. One of the windows was broken glass, scattered like frozen rain across the stoop. He noted that detail, always did. The wind carried the faintest scent of something metallic and sour. Maybe blood. Maybe old rust. He approached the house carefully, hand resting on the grip of his holstered sidearm. The door was ajar. His flashlight cut through the interior gloom, revealing fragments. A toppled chair, a framed photo smashed on the floor, a handprint read and deliberate dragged across the wall like a warning. He stepped inside. What happened in the next 4 minutes has never been fully explained. The cruiser's dashcam caught only Ryker's departure and the empty seat that remained. The radio recorded a few cryptic words before cutting off. Unit 412. I see. And then a crackling nothing. It was as if the night itself swallowed his signal. Backup arrived to find the house empty. No sign of Ryker. No sign of a struggle. The murder victims were there. But the scene felt disturbed. Not just by violence, but by something else. Something out of step. The chairs were rearranged from the original call-in photos. A single drawer was left open in the kitchen, its contents untouched, except for one missing knife. Blood spatter was inconsistent with the described injuries. And Ryker's cruiser? Still parked outside, engine warm. Driver's door open. His hat on the passenger seat, dry despite the rain. The search lasted days. Dogs were brought in. Drones. Divers combed the nearby river. But no body. No footprints past the porch. It was as if Ryker had walked into that house and then out of existence. But there's one detail the initial reports never mentioned. A neighbor, elderly, nearly blind, insisted she saw 2 sets of headlights that night, one behind Ryker's. A second vehicle pulling up slowly, lights off, waiting down the road. It wasn't part of any official dispatch. It didn't belong to any trooper. She said the second car never left. Just disappeared when no one was watching. And so began the long silence. 11 years of unanswered questions. A missing trooper. A closed case, reopened and shelved again. A family left to wonder whether Alan Ryker died that night or chose not to come home. 11 years can change everything and nothing all at once. The world moves forward, new roads are paved, trees fall and grow again. Names fade from headlines, but some places remain stubbornly still, as if time forgets them on purpose. In a privately owned junkyard outside of Black Ridge, buried behind a barricade of discarded tractors and rust-bitten husks of sedans, sat a 1973 Plymouth Fury. The paint had long given up its fight, flaked away in sun-blistered curls, exposing skin pocked with corrosion and rain rot. It didn't stand out. That was the point. The junkyard was the kind of place that didn't take inventory anymore. Owned by an aging recluse named Emmett Davis, it stretched across 20 acres of choking weeds and heaped metal, surrounded by fencing that bowed under its own rust. Local rumor said Emmett hadn't sold a part in years, just collected things, cars, tools, stories, and let them rot under the weight of time and secrecy. The Fury had arrived quietly. No paperwork, no tow slip filed with the county, just dropped off one night, covered with a canvas tarp already stained with oil and mildew. Davis said it came from an estate cleanout upstate. No one asked further. That was back in 2014. For over a decade, it sat untouched, unnoticed, its windshield filmed with grime, tires collapsed into the dirt, but it wasn't forgotten, not entirely. A private investigator named Lena Rourke arrived at the yard by chance or maybe instinct. She was tracking down fraudulent insurance claims tied to ghost vehicles, cross-referencing scrapyards and title records. Her search led her to a VIN that shouldn't have existed anymore. When she asked Emmett about it, his expression flickered in the way old men do when a lie is already too late to catch. He led her to the backlot with a limp and a cough, muttering that he didn't mess with that one. They found the Fury nestled beneath a canopy of overgrowth, nature reclaiming it branch by branch. Rourke ran her fingers along the door handle, peeled back the tarp. It moaned like something exhaling after a long, painful sleep. The door creaked open. The smell hit her first. Not death. Not rot. Something older. Decay woven with gasoline, mildew, and something unmistakably wrong. The interior was a time capsule, yellowed receipts on the dash, a cassette in the player, a melted flashlight in the passenger floorboard. But it was what she found in the trunk that froze her breath. Wrapped in blue tarp, brittle with age, was a human skeleton curled like a question mark. The bones were sun-bleached but intact. Nestled beside the remains was a faded wallet. Inside, a water damage license. The name was smudged, the photo barely visible. But the badge tucked inside the back flap was not. It belonged to a man named Jonah Harlan, the only witness in the Holloway murder investigation, the same case State Trooper Alan Ryker had vanished investigating 11 years ago. The body was never supposed to be found. But metal remembers. Rust doesn't sleep. It waits. And now, someone was going to have to start asking the right questions again. Black Ridge wasn't on most maps. Tucked into the folds of forested hills and forgotten mining trails, it existed more as an echo than a town. 38 residents, a shuttered post office, and a gas station that still sold cassette tapes. Most nights passed quietly there. But not the night of March 9, 2013. The 911 call came in at 9:43 p.m. A man's voice, shaky, out of breath, reported that he had heard gunshots coming from the Holloway house, a white clapboard structure off Deer Hollow Road. The caller identified himself as Jonah Harlan, a local mechanic known mostly for his silence and an old dog he walked every evening. He didn't say much else, just that he heard screaming, then silence. Then, "There's something wrong, real wrong." The dispatcher pressed for details, the line cut off. Trooper Alan Ryker was already on patrol that evening, driving the long rural stretch between counties. When the call was dispatched, he was the closest unit less than 20 minutes out. He acknowledged the call, turned off onto the narrow highway leading toward Black Ridge, and was swallowed whole by the dark. The Holloway residence sat near the tree line, where the woods began to thicken and the road thinned into gravel. The Holloways, Daniel and Marla, had lived there for nearly 20 years. Retired, quiet. No record of trouble, no visitors, no children. The sort of people you never expected to hear about, especially not like this. Ryker arrived just after 10:05 p.m. The rain had started by then, fine and sharp, turning the gravel to slush. The dashboard camera recorded him pulling in, headlights flaring against the white siding of the house. The porch light was on, swaying slightly in the wind. But the front door was open. That, too, was caught on camera, just swinging, back and forth. He radioed in his arrival. Then, a pause. Then those final, clipped words, "Unit 412. I see." Static swallowed the rest. The timeline after that becomes murky. What's certain is that backup arrived 36 minutes later to a scene that felt less like a crime scene and more like a message. Daniel and Marla Holloway were found in their living room. Both shot twice, execution style. But it wasn't just the precision that disturbed investigators, it was the presentation. Their bodies were propped on the couch, hands folded in their laps. The television was on, turned to static. A teacup balanced on the edge of the coffee table, filled to the brim and untouched. There were no signs of forced entry, no valuables taken, and Ryker was gone. Jonah Harlan, the man who made the call, was nowhere to be found. His dog was discovered tied up in his yard, barking into the empty woods. His trailer door hung open. A coffee mug sat on the counter, still steaming. A single chair was knocked over. There was no blood, no struggle, just absence. The official report labeled it a double homicide with missing persons, but those who reviewed the scene said it didn't feel like a break-in. It didn't feel like a robbery. It felt staged, like the killer wanted someone to find it just the way it was. And in the weeks that followed, the town of Black Ridge returned to silence. No more tips, no leads. No sightings of Ryker. Only a growing unease that something had come through their town that night. Something not looking to steal but to silence. The audio file lasted only 9 seconds, but investigators played it over and over again, searching for something that was never there. Clarity. On the night of March 9, 2013, at exactly 10:07 p.m., the dispatcher at County Communications logged the final known transmission from Trooper Alan Ryker. Unit 412, I see. A pause. Faint static. Then, nothing. Not a click, not a confirmation. Not a goodbye. The dispatch logs show the usual call cadence leading up to that moment. Ryker checking in periodically, noting mileage, traffic conditions, and confirming the response to the Holloway residents. His voice was clear then, even unremarkable in its steadiness. But something in those final words, when slowed down and filtered through noise reduction software, hinted at hesitation. I see. What did he see? Within minutes of the signal drop, the dispatcher attempted a follow-up. Standard protocol, no response. They pinged Ryker's onboard CAD, the vehicle's computer system. It registered as active, idling, parked on Deer Hollow Road. GPS placed it precisely 100 yards from the Holloway home. A second unit was dispatched. By the time they arrived at 10:43 p.m., the cruiser was still there. Lights off. Engine still warm. The scene felt undisturbed. The driver's side door was ajar, letting in beads of rain that pooled on the vinyl seat. The patrol car's contents were untouched clipboard, citation pad, unopened energy drink. Ryker's hat resting on the passenger side, dry and neatly placed, as though it had been removed with intention. His service weapon remained in its lockbox, undrawn. There were no signs of a scuffle, no broken glass, no drag marks on the soft shoulder of the road. They searched the area by foot and drone, calling his name until it dissolved into the rustling trees. Dogs were brought in from 2 counties over. They caught his scent from the cruiser but lost it 20 paces in like it had been plucked out of the air. One deputy later described the search as hunting for a shadow that never cast. Reviewing the car's dashcam yielded little more. It captured the final turn off the main road, the approach toward the house, and a few indistinct shapes under the trees. The footage cut out abruptly at 10:06 p.m. The recording corrupted by what analysts later called unknown interference, though privately, more than one technician admitted they'd never seen anything quite like it, like the camera had gone blind. What bothered investigators most wasn't what was found, but what wasn't. If Ryker had been taken, there were no tracks. If he'd walked off voluntarily, there were no clues. If he'd met with violence, there was no aftermath. No blood, no torn fabric, no trace of fear or panic. Just an empty car and a quiet road, like someone had pressed pause on reality. The cruiser was towed and preserved. Forensics combed it from bumper to bumper. Nothing. Even the prints were ordinary Rykers, and Rykers alone. The only anomaly was a sticky residue on the radio mic. Lab tests came back inconclusive. Organic, but degraded. Possibly sap. Possibly something else. The surrounding area held its silence. The woods were still. The house had already revealed its horror. But the land around it, the air felt wrong. Officers noted the unnatural quiet. No frogs. No insects. The rain made no sound as it fell on the leaves. One rookie deputy, barely out of training, swore she heard breathing behind her as she searched the tree line. When she turned, there was only the wind, curling through the dark. In the end, they had no choice but to log it as an unresolved disappearance. Ryker's badge number was placed on indefinite leave. But in the years that followed, whenever a trooper passed through Black Ridge, they'd switch off their radios, even if only for a minute. And if you asked why, they might not answer. But some would admit they still heard it, faint and low, an echo buried deep in the scanner. Unit 412. I see. Then static. Then nothing. Before the headlines, before the disappearance, before the bones turned up in the trunk of a forgotten car, Alan Ryker was just a man. A uniform. A routine. A voice on the radio whose tone never betrayed stress or fear. In his personnel file, the words dependable, level-headed, and self-contained appear more than once. Commendations too. Letters from supervisors praising his calm in chaos, his discipline, his ability to diffuse high-tension situations with little more than his presence. But a file only says so much. Ryker served 12 years with the state police before the night he vanished. Before that, 2 tours overseas as a military police officer, Fallujah, Kandahar, the places that leave quiet scars. He rarely spoke of it, only that the desert nights had a silence he couldn't unhear, even after coming home. Fellow troopers said he carried himself like a man who didn't need to prove anything. No swagger. No bravado. Just a steady hand and a pair of eyes that missed nothing. He never married young. Didn't date much either. Those who knew him in the early years described him as polite, courteous, and solitary. He had a way of excusing himself from conversations without anyone noticing. When he finally met Claire, his wife, it surprised people. Not because he wasn't the type to love, but because it was the first time anyone had seen him let someone in. Even then, there was something guarded in the way he touched her shoulder, as if afraid he might break something delicate. Colleagues recall that Ryker never lost his temper. Not once, not during arrests, not during chases, not even when a suspect spit in his face. But there was a different kind of tension beneath the surface. Not anger, something heavier. One officer put it simply. He had the look of a man who'd seen something no one should see, and couldn't quite forget it. There was one case that never left him. It happened 6 years before Black Ridge. A missing child, 7 years old. The girl vanished, walking home from school. Ryker was one of the first on scene. He led the search for weeks on foot, by air, through frostbitten fields and ice-covered streams. She was never found. The only clue, a red mitten left on a fallen fence post, 15 miles from home. Ryker kept a photo of it in his desk drawer. Not on the wall, not in a file, loose. Like it could disappear at any moment if he didn't keep an eye on it. After that case, something shifted. He stopped volunteering for community events. Stopped going out with the other troopers after shifts. He began taking more late-night patrols, long stretches on lonely roads. The kind of assignments no one fought for, but Ryker always requested. Claire said he started having dreams. He wouldn't describe them. Just sat up in bed in the middle of the night, staring out the window as if listening for something. Sometimes he wrote things down in a small, leather-bound notebook. He never let anyone read it. And yet, for all that distance, Ryker never missed a birthday call, never forgot a colleague's retirement party, never turned away a rookie asking for help. He was a contradiction. Warm when it mattered, unreachable when it hurt. In the months leading up to his disappearance, there were signs, small ones. He started stopping by dispatch more often, lingering by the map board, asking about old calls from Black Ridge. He checked out property files without logging them. He drove routes that didn't show on the daily logs. And then there was the note he left on his nightstand the day before the Holloway call. 3 words, barely legible, written in block letters. It's starting again. Who was Alan Ryker? A good cop, a husband, a man haunted by unfinished things, a man who wore silence like armor, and maybe, a man who saw the end long before anyone else. The house hasn't changed much. The wallpaper is still curling in the corners, a floral print from another era. The kitchen clock ticks too loudly in the stillness, and the hall light flickers when it rains. Claire Ryker never fixed it. She says it reminds her of him. Something about the hum, the buzz of a storm coming. She doesn't like being called a widow, says the word doesn't fit. Not until she sees a body. Not until someone knocks on her door and tells her, with certainty, that Alan isn't coming back. Until then, she waits. Quietly, steadily. The way he used to. In the first few weeks after his disappearance, people came often. Neighbors with casseroles, officers with updates, reporters with questions. Claire would open the door, nod politely, and retreat behind the curtain of her own thoughts. She learned to speak in careful fragments, like her husband did. She didn't cry on camera. She didn't host vigils. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table, the one with the scorched edge from a forgotten pan, and stared at his mug-black ceramic, chipped at the lip. Every morning, she filled it anyway. She remembers the little things. The hiss of wet boots on the mat by the door. The way he would hum tunelessly while reading the news, lips barely moving. Burnt toast he always pretended not to notice. A coat that always smelled faintly of pine and gun oil. She says he was a man who carried weight in invisible ways. When he loved, it was quiet. When he was afraid, it was quieter. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she would find him standing by the window, not looking out, not really, just listening. Like he was waiting for something to knock back. The last month before he disappeared, Claire noticed changes. Subtle, but there. He began locking his desk drawer. Kept the radio volume low, even when alone. Once, she found a torn topographic map stuffed beneath the sink, marked with circles and dates she didn't understand. When she asked him about it, he gave her a look she still can't forget, not anger, not dismissal, just fear. The kind that comes from knowing too much. He stopped sleeping. He started writing in that little leather notebook again, the one he hadn't touched in years. When she asked if he was okay, he said, "Something's waking up in that town. I think I got too close before. This time, I won't let it slip away." He didn't explain what it was. The day he left for Black Ridge, he kissed her cheek, told her not to wait up. She said something casual, something about picking up milk. He smiled, soft and distant, like a man already halfway gone. She never saw him again. But Claire doesn't believe he ran, not for a second. She's read the reports, seen the interviews, listened to the theories whispered in gas stations and passed along at church bake sales. Some say he broke under pressure. Some say he snapped. Some think he joined whatever darkness he was chasing. Claire doesn't. She believes he found something he wasn't supposed to. That he stayed to bury it. And maybe, she says, one day he'll come back not like a ghost or a headline, but like a man tired of being hunted by shadows. She still sets a place for him on their anniversary. Still checks the mailbox for letters with no return address. Still wakes up at 3:12 a.m., the exact time his radio went dead, and listens to the silence. Not because she's lost him, but because somewhere, deep in her chest, she knows he's still out there, watching, waiting, just like her. They found the journal in the fireplace, half consumed, buried beneath a soft bed of cold ash. It might have been lost entirely if not for a fluke. One investigator brushing soot from the hearth, noticing the curled edge of something fibrous and out of place. Most of the pages were charred to black lace, unreadable, fragile as dead leaves, but a few had survived the fire, scorched but legible, like something refusing to be forgotten. It was a small, leather-bound notebook, same kind Ryker was known to carry, though he hadn't used one in years. This one was older, worn at the spine, the cover darkened by oil or sweat. No name inside, no dates, no structure, just a storm of entries, observations, scrawls written in a hand that grew tighter and more erratic as the pages went on. The first pages seemed benign. Coordinates, cross streets, mentions of old homesteads and abandoned outbuildings scattered across Black Ridge and its bordering woods. A few crude maps, hand-drawn, some with red circles that had been stabbed over and over with a pen until they tore through. But as the entries progressed, so did the tone. What began as routine field notes dissolved into something more frantic, almost obsessive. Names began to appear. Daryl Milton, Tanya Keever, Esther Dunn, Jonah Harlan. Each name was underlined, sometimes multiple times. Some had dates beside them, disappearances ranging as far back as 1986. Some had question marks. Others, a simple "gone" scrawled next to them in blocky capital letters. These weren't just names from old case files. They were the same people whose names had surfaced briefly during the Holloway investigation, whispered in, off-the-record conversations, printed once in a local column, and then vanished. Claire never saw the journal before the night Alan disappeared. She told investigators that he'd grown secretive in those final weeks, hiding documents, locking drawers, burning things in the backyard drum without explanation. Once, she caught a glimpse of a page as he slammed the book shut. It had just one line, written in the center of the page. "They don't die, they disappear." One page, near the middle, was almost fully intact. The handwriting was larger, more rushed. It read, "Something in the town, beneath it, or beside it, not new, ancient. They feed it, or fear it, maybe both. No one talks, but they know." The Holloways were only the latest, not the last. "I was wrong to stop before. I won't stop now." That was followed by a string of names, some familiar, others unknown. Then, abruptly, the pages went black, burned to the binding. But not all damage came from fire. Several pages had been violently torn out, roots ripped from soil. Jagged remnants clung to the spine, fibers twisted and strained. Someone removed them in haste. And not cleanly. Whether it was Ryker himself or someone else, investigators couldn't say. What remained was haunting. Fragments, pieces, shadows of a mind, spiraling into something vast and unseen. The notebook was logged into evidence, never released to the public, not officially. But copies were made. One landed in the hands of a retired detective who'd once worked a missing persons case in Black Ridge. She stared at the pages for hours, her fingers tracing Ryker's handwriting like a map. He wasn't paranoid, she said quietly. He was documenting a pattern no one wanted to believe. And in the margins of one of the last surviving pages, nearly missed beneath the soot, were 2 words written sideways, in trembling script. "They're watching." In the months that followed Ryker's disappearance, the investigation slowed like a clock winding down. At first, there was urgency, a flurry of activity, search parties fanning out into the hills, drones sweeping the tree canopy. The media circling like vultures hoping for a story with teeth. But as weeks turned into months, the pressure softened. The headlines changed, the urgency bled out. Ryker was no longer breaking news, he was a cold case. Black Ridge, for its part, returned to what it did best: silence. The townspeople stopped answering questions. Doors stayed closed. Curtains twitched. Locals who had once offered coffee and vague recollections to troopers began to vanish from their own front porches. Nobody said it aloud, but something unspoken passed between them, an agreement stitched into glances, nods, unfinished sentences. They knew something, or thought they did. But they weren't about to share it with outsiders. Some of the investigators began whispering among themselves, too. About how evidence went missing. About how body cam footage mysteriously failed to upload. About phone records being delayed, denied, or accidentally wiped. About internal memos from higher up the chain, advising them to prioritize active cases. And then there was the strangest thing: Ryker's case file itself. Pieces of it began to disappear. Notes he'd submitted weeks before the Holloway call were gone. Surveillance photos he'd logged into evidence were marked as never received. No one took responsibility. No one launched an internal review. To Claire, it was obvious. Someone didn't want the truth found. The theory that Ryker had simply snapped a breakdown, a mental break, a staged vanishing act, was floated more often as time passed. Easier to believe than the alternative. Easier to accept that he walked away than to consider he'd gotten too close to something meant to stay buried. Then came the whispers. They started small. A deputy mentioned hearing about old land deeds buried under Black Ridge, property sold in the 1,940 with sealed ownership records. A records clerk claimed she'd found 2 death certificates with matching social security numbers, signed by the same coroner, a decade apart. A woman who once taught at the local elementary school said she remembered students vanishing mid-year transferred, according to the paperwork, though their names were never heard again. She recalled a little girl with auburn braids who came in one day crying and left the next, her desk cleared, her name scratched from the roll. Whispers turned into theories. Some thought Ryker had stumbled upon something organized, an underground trafficking ring, a long-buried scandal involving prominent families in town. Others were more superstitious. They spoke of the land itself, of the old mine shafts beneath the hills, of stories passed down in broken dialects about things that live in the dark and take what they please. They said the Holloways knew too much, that Jonah Harlan saw something he was never meant to see. And Ryker, he didn't vanish. He was taken. It was a phrase that kept returning. Black Ridge eats its secrets. Eventually, the case was shelved. Officially labeled, unsolved, presumed deceased. A file number, a name on a database, a photograph turned grayscale with time. The media stopped calling. The town kept breathing, quiet and close-mouthed. But Claire still waited, and in the silence of that waiting, something else festered. Dead air isn't truly silent. It hums, faint and electric, like a presence on the line just out of reach. And those who still cared, those who hadn't forgotten, Ryker swore they could feel it. In the radio static, in the gaps between memories, in the places where the truth had been removed like a pulled tooth, leaving only the ache behind. The ink faded slowly. First, the corners curled under sun and wind. Then the colors dulled the deep blue of the uniform. The badge glint on his chest. The stoic lines of Alan Ryker's face softening into blur. Posters once stapled to utility poles and pinned to corkboards at rural diners peeled away in the rain. At first, people replaced them, then they didn't. Time has a way of grinding even the sharpest images into dust. 11 years passed, and with them, the urgency. The headlines grew colder, the questions less frequent. New crises demanded attention. New faces filled the missing persons bulletins. But Ryker's remained, buried somewhere in the archives, still marked unresolved, still waiting for a resolution that would never come. Claire stayed in the house for as long as she could. The floors creaked louder with every season. The refrigerator rattled at night like it was remembering. The bed never moved. His side stayed untouched, the pillow still bearing the faint indentation of the last night he slept there. Eventually, the mortgage bled dry, and she let it go, sold what she had to. Packed what little of him she could carry in a shoebox, the watch, the wedding photo, the last note he ever left her, and moved to a smaller town with quieter nights. She never remarried, never stopped looking. Their son, Ben, took it harder. He was 15 when Ryker disappeared, just old enough to understand the permanence, but too young to accept the ambiguity. For years, he believed his father would walk through the door, drenched in rain, carrying some explanation too complicated for the rest of them to understand. As the years wore on, that belief curdled into something bitter. He drifted first emotionally, then physically. By 19, he was gone too. No note, just silence, like his father before him. In Black Ridge, the Holloway murders became the stuff of murmured conversation and fading local legend. The house was sold to a property flipper who gutted the interior and painted over the stains. A couple from out of state moved in, never told the history. They planted sunflowers in the yard, most bloomed. One never did. Neighbors didn't ask questions. The murder file was shelved within the year. No new evidence. No suspects. No statements. Jonah Harlan's name was added to the list of presumed dead. His trailer was cleared out, sold for scrap. His dog, a limping mutt named Radar, lived another 3 years with a rescue worker who didn't know where he came from. Ryker's patrol car sat in storage for years, collecting dust, then rust, until someone decided to offload it to a third-party auction. That paperwork was never signed. The vehicle disappeared from inventory. No one noticed. But something else didn't fade, not completely. In the woods beyond Black Ridge, hikers reported hearing strange sounds, low hums, the kind that vibrate behind the teeth. A few swore they saw lights moving where no roads existed. Once a year, on the anniversary of Ryker's disappearance, someone left a bundle of wildflowers on the Holloway porch. No one ever saw who did it. They were always gone by morning. Time passed, yes, but something remained, lurking in the margins, patient, like rust beneath paint, like a secret waiting to be spoken aloud. And under 11 years of rain, it grew, quietly, persistently, until the day someone finally opened the trunk. It was supposed to be a routine job. Paperwork, mostly tracking vehicles tied to a low-level insurance fraud case that had stretched across 3 states. The kind of assignment private investigator Lena Rourke had grown used to in the last decade. After years of field work, she'd traded gunmetal tension and late-night stakeouts for spreadsheets, car titles, and odometer discrepancies. It paid the bills. It kept her grounded, until it didn't. The tip came from a disgruntled employee at a salvage auction firm in Kentucky. A mismatched VIN had raised red flags in a case involving a fraudulent claim on a supposedly crushed vehicle. According to the title records, the car, a 1973 Plymouth Fury, had been declared unrecoverable in 2014. But a quiet audit showed the VIN had been scanned again, more recently, on a manifest from a junkyard on the edge of Black Ridge, just 6 months prior. It wasn't listed for sale. It wasn't listed at all. Just logged once, then never mentioned again. Rourke wasn't one to chase ghosts. But she'd heard of Black Ridge, had even driven through it once, years back, on a separate case. The town left a residue. So she drove out again, following the coordinates to a weed-choked stretch of fencing topped with barbed wire and time-worn no trespassing signs that had faded into the color of dirt. The name, Davis Auto Salvage, was barely visible on the rusted gate. Inside, it was less a junkyard and more a graveyard. Rows of cars stacked on top of each other like fossilized bones, some half swallowed by underbrush. Time had twisted the place into something more organic: metal frames, swallowed by ivy, moss growing over hoods like velvet shrouds. No staff, no signs of life. Just the quiet ticking of insects and the slow groan of wind against metal. The Plymouth Fury was buried near the far end, behind a collapsed tow truck and the remnants of a school bus that hadn't seen children in decades. At first, it didn't look like much. Its body was rust-pocked and sun-bleached, the original blue paint clinging on in streaks. The windshield was cracked, tires long since deflated into the soil. But the VIN matched. Every digit. Rourke's breath caught. She took out her camera, snapped a few photos. When she stepped closer, the air around the vehicle felt heavier, thicker, like walking into a submerged room. The doors were jammed. It took her 10 minutes to pry one open, the hinges shrieking like an animal in pain. The interior was mummified in dust and mildew. The glove box was empty. The rear seats had collapsed inward, sagging under their own decay. But it was the trunk that refused to open, even with a crowbar. She called in a favor an old contact in law enforcement, who still owed her for a case she cracked years ago. He brought bolt cutters, a pry tool, and silence. When they finally popped the trunk, it didn't open with a bang, but a hiss. A rush of air, stale and wrong, pushed out like the breath of something buried. Inside was a shape wrapped in blue tarp, shrunken and warped. The smell confirmed what the eyes already suspected. Rourke stepped back, hand over her mouth. Her contact turned away, retching. They called it in. CSI arrived hours later. By then, night had fallen, and the junkyard was wrapped in fog. Flashlights bobbed like willow, the wisps through the aisles of abandoned machines. Later, the lab results would confirm the impossible. The remains belonged to Jonah Harlan, the only known witness to the Holloway murders, missing for over a decade, presumed dead. Found, at last, in the trunk of a car that should never have existed, one that hadn't been seen since the night Ryker vanished. And underneath that rusted lid, time began to unwind. Not just a body. A clue. A crack in the silence. Something had survived the long sleep. And now, it was awake. The tarp was stiff with time, faded from blue to the mottled gray of forgotten things. It had the texture of something left too long in sun and rot, its fibers hardened by weather, age, and secrets. When crime scene technicians finally unwrapped it beneath the harsh white beams of floodlights, what spilled out wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden horror, no sharp intake of breath, just the quiet click of gloved hands pausing, the kind of stillness that only comes when the unthinkable becomes real. Bones. A full human skeleton, curled in the fetal position like a question never asked. The skull tilted to one side, as though listening. The lower jaw was missing. Several ribs were cracked, One snapped clean through, as if from a blow. The femurs showed signs of old breaks healed incorrectly, or maybe never healed at all. Around the neck, a coil of wire still clung, its rusted twist biting into vertebrae that had long forgotten how to protest. No ID was found in the trunk. No wallet. No clothing beyond scraps of denim and a torn flannel sleeve stuck to the tarp by mildew and rot. But tucked under one shoulder blade was a plastic keychain, cracked, faded, and unmistakable. It bore the logo of a Black Ridge mechanic shop, Harlan's Auto. The words were barely legible, but the implication wasn't. Jonah Harlan. The name dropped like a stone through a lake of long-held silence. It had been 11 years since he made that 911 call. 11 years since he vanished without a trace on the same night the Holloways were murdered and Trooper Alan Ryker disappeared. Some believed he fled. Others suspected he had a role in the killings. A few believed he'd been silenced. Now, finally, there was proof. The forensics team fast-tracked the dental analysis, matching records pulled from a dusty file in the basement of a shuttered clinic. A gold-capped molar. A childhood extraction. All of it pointed to one person. Jonah hadn't run. He had been dead all along. The implications rippled outward. If Jonah was in the trunk, then someone had deliberately hidden his body. Not just dumped, but folded, wrapped, sealed, and entombed in a vehicle buried beneath a tangle of other wrecks. This wasn't carelessness, it was calculated. Hidden in a place where people rarely went. In a yard that didn't log its inventory. On property owned by a man who hadn't spoken to a soul in years. And the car. The 1973 Plymouth Fury. Not just any junker, but a model matching the unmarked surveillance vehicles once used by state law enforcement. The VIN had been wiped from public records. How it ended up in Black Ridge, or who brought it there, was a question without an answer. But its presence rewrote everything. Ryker had been investigating a double homicide. The only witness vanished. Now, that witness was found murdered, hidden in a car that hadn't moved in over a decade. It raised a brutal possibility. Ryker hadn't disappeared in the chaos. He had been close, so close to exposing something, and someone made sure the only man who might confirm it was silenced first. In that moment, the case fractured wide open again. The bodies, the timeline, the evidence. And for those still paying attention, one chilling detail stood out above all. The condition of the wire around Jonah's neck. It hadn't rusted the same way the rest of the metal had. It was newer, fresh, not 11 years old. Which meant Jonah might not have died that night in 2013. He may have lived in silence for years. Long enough to watch everything unravel from the shadows. Long enough for someone to make sure he never spoke again. The morning after the body was pulled from the trunk, the junkyard sat unnaturally quiet. Not the kind of quiet born of solitude or early hours, but the stilled hush of something interrupted. Like the air had stopped moving, like the earth had been holding its breath since the night before. Officers returned with warrants and questions, prepared to interview the yard's owner, Emmett Davis, a man who had spent the last 2 decades living just beyond the edge of town, among rusted metal and discarded engines, with no one for company but the cicadas and the dead cars. But Davis was gone. His trailer, parked near the edge of the yard beneath the leaning oak tree, was open, not just unlocked open. The door hung wide like a jaw unhinged, and inside, the world had been stripped clean. Cabinets emptied, the mattress gone. Dresser drawers pulled from their tracks and missing. Even the photographs once thumbtacked to the stained wall panels were taken. Only the outlines of their sun-bleached absence remained, ghost frames marking where memories had once been. No clothes, no food, no bills, no ID, nothing. Except for one thing. On the table, left deliberately, it seemed was a single Polaroid photo. The kind with thick white borders and washed-out color, already curling at the corners from humidity. It lay face up, and when Detective Myers reached for it with gloved hands, He swore he felt a chill roll up his arm, like something old had exhaled into the room. The image showed a man sitting on the hood of a car, a faded black uniform, hands resting on his knees. The photo was overexposed, but the face was clear enough, the badge on his chest, the eyes staring directly at the lens. Alan Ryker. Not before his disappearance. After. His beard was heavier, hair longer, sun-weathered. He looked tired, worn in a way no official portrait ever captured. The background suggested somewhere rural treeline behind him, a shack or outbuilding to the left. In the far corner of the image, barely noticeable, was what looked like the twisted husk of another car, half swallowed by weeds. But it was him. There was no mistaking it. The timestamp on the back, scribbled in blue ink, May 2017. 4 years after Ryker had vanished. The discovery detonated through law enforcement like a slow bomb. If the photo was real, and early forensic analysis suggested no evidence of manipulation, then Ryker had been alive. Not just surviving, but out there, somewhere, unseen, unaccounted for. And Emmett Davis? The man who had unknowingly or perhaps deliberately harbored the car containing a murder victim for over a decade, was now missing without a trace. No vehicle sightings, no traffic cams, no neighbors reporting strange movement. Just gone, like a page torn clean from a book. People in Black Ridge pretended not to notice. At the diner, no one mentioned Davis. At the gas station, his name was met with shrugs. It was as if the town had already prepared itself for his disappearance. As if it was expected. But investigators began to wonder, had Davis really not known about the body in the car? Or had he been hiding it? Had he known Ryker, perhaps even helped him vanish? The questions multiplied, spiraling outward like cracks in glass. And always, they circled back to the same two facts. Ryker had reappeared long after he was presumed dead. And now, the one man who might have explained that photo had vanished, too. The Polaroid was placed into evidence, sealed in plastic, and archived. But those who saw it up close could not forget the expression on Ryker's face. Not fear, not warning. Resignation. As if he knew he was being seen. As if he had waited, years in hiding, for that moment. As if the story wasn't over. Not yet. The deeper they went into Black Ridge, the less sense things made. Roads that appeared on GPS vanished beneath bramble and moss. Property lines that were clear on county records shifted strangely on foot, with fences erected where none had been marked, and old stone boundaries buried under decades of undergrowth. It was as if the town itself was misremembering its own shape. After the discovery of Jonah Harlan's body and the disappearance of Emmett Davis, the investigation reignited with reluctant urgency. A new team was brought in, young, analytical, not yet worn down by the years of dead ends. Among them was Landon Price, a forensic cartographer with a reputation for noticing what others didn't. It was Price who first flagged the inconsistencies in the original Holloway crime scene documentation. The photos from that night, long considered routine evidence, showed the living room as it had been found. The Holloways posed eerily on the couch, the television casting static light, cups placed neatly on the table. But Price noticed something off. Not in the room, but in the window. Through the smudged glass behind the couch, just visible between the curtain folds, there was a tree line. And in the next photo, taken minutes later, that same window revealed open space. No trees, just fog. He cross-referenced those angles with modern drone footage and realized the geography didn't match. The Holloway residence, according to town records, was surrounded by thick woods to the rear. But in the photographs, something was missing or altered. He pulled property maps going back to the 1980 seconds and found another oddity. The land directly behind the Holloway home had once included a narrow, winding footpath, listed only as county utility access. It hadn't been mentioned in any official reports. The trail was overgrown, nearly invisible now, but Price found it. A thin corridor carved between leaning trees and old brush, leading northward away from the house, then down into a shallow ravine. At the center of that depression was a well stone-ringed, moss-covered, dry for decades. No marker, no lid, just a hollow throat descending into shadow. It hadn't been searched before. It hadn't even been known. When they lowered a camera into the darkness, what it revealed wasn't a clean well bottom, but debris. Broken boards, rusted tools, and something else, shattered glass, a crushed cassette recorder, and what appeared to be bone. Not full skeletons, but fragments, enough to suggest presence, enough to suggest violence. The soil samples pulled from the rim tested positive for trace blood proteins. Human, mixed. The surrounding trees bore strange damage scars along the bark, like something had been dragged past them repeatedly. Price marked the site. The team called it unofficial. The town called it cursed. Locals had another name for it, passed quietly through generations. The Devil's Crossroads. They said it had once been a meeting place, long before maps, long before boundaries, where animals were left tied in the dark, where whispers outlived their speakers. The land there didn't keep secrets, it swallowed them. But the well, once silent, had begun to speak again. Through ash, through soil, through echoes that crawled back into the present, refusing to stay buried. And somewhere nearby, the truth that Ryker had chased all those years ago was waiting, its shape beginning to take form. Not as a theory, but as a place. It began with the names, scrawled in Ryker's burned journal, scattered across brittle pages like a cipher half lost to fire. Some had been underlined once, others circled in frantic ink, punctuated with question marks or single-word notes. Gone. No record. Check grave. At the time, investigators had dismissed them as scribblings of a man slipping toward obsession. But when the list was pulled again, now with the context of a dead witness and a vanished junkyard owner, it told a different story. Landon Price fed the names into a database cross-referencing cold cases, missing persons, death certificates, and archived police reports from the last 70 years. It took weeks, but the pattern emerged like a bruise rising beneath skin. 32 people, all vanished between the years of 1951 and 2013. Most from Black Ridge, some from neighboring counties. Many were never investigated thoroughly. A few were ruled suicides or accidents, with evidence paper-thin or conveniently inconclusive. One boy, age 10, was said to have drowned in the creek, yet no body was ever recovered. A young woman's car was found abandoned near the cliffs, but no search dogs ever caught her scent. A hunter went missing in the woods, and his rifle was found broken clean in two, no explanation ever offered. All of them, every last name had some tie to one address, 123 Lantern Hollow Road. The Holloway House. The realization was like cold water down the spine. The victims weren't random. They had all passed through that property, at some point, years before the Holloways lived there. Some were renters. One was a delivery driver. Another was listed as a distant cousin of a former owner. And the records, where they existed, were riddled with anomalies. Property deeds transferred through shell names. Building permits backdated, or never signed. Even birth certificates belonging to children raised on that land appeared altered, blurred at the edges, as if rewritten after the fact. It all traced back to a family line, the Darrows. A name nearly forgotten in town lore, spoken in hushed tones, if at all. The Darrows had once owned much of Black Ridge's land. Timber, mining rights, even parts of the now defunct quarry. But they disappeared slowly, like smoke rising into fog. The last known Darrow to live in the area died in the late 1942, an accidental fire. According to old papers, house burned to the foundation, no remains ever found. But the land, it was passed on. Quietly. Sold in cash, names changing with each decade, until the Holloways became the final occupants. Just a retired couple, quiet, kind. Or so it seemed. Ryker had uncovered the pattern. The journal wasn't madness, it was method. He saw the shape in the silence, the rhythm in the forgetting. The way tragedy folded back on itself every few years, always within reach of that house. Always wrapped in polite disappearances and the kind of grief no one talks about. The silence was the clue. Not just the absence of noise, but the presence of something holding it shut. Something generational. Something that knew how to erase. And now, with bones found, with a witness dead, and a photo placing Ryker alive 4 years post-disappearance, the question was no longer what happened to him. It was what he had found in that house, what he had touched that had tried, so desperately, to erase him too. But it hadn't. Not completely. Not yet. The camcorder was found by accident. Investigators had returned to Davis Auto Salvage, not in search of new evidence, but to photograph the grounds for an archival report. The property had been scheduled for auction after Emmett Davis's sudden disappearance, and a junior officer tasked with clearing the site found the safe behind a filing cabinet, its door already open, its contents reduced to dust and scraps except for the camera. It was old, early 2000s, the kind that still took mini DV tapes. The battery was corroded, long dead. The casing was scratched, dented, but intact. Inside, the tape remained, marked with nothing more than a single strip of yellowing tape and 2 words scrawled in permanent marker: "Watch alone." They didn't. The footage, when finally recovered by the tech lab, was grainy, warped by time and moisture. Most of it was unremarkable. Snippets of static, abrupt cuts, brief shots of the junkyard under moonlight. But the final 10 minutes were different. The timestamp placed it just over 5 weeks after Alan Ryker vanished. Early morning hours, night vision lens. The screen glowed in ghostly green as the image stabilized on a clearing in the woods. Not far from the junkyard, but not quite part of it either. The ground was disturbed. A shovel leaned against a tree, and then, from the left of frame, Ryker stepped into view. His face was gaunt. The rigid lines of his jaw had softened into hollow curves. He was wearing civilian clothes, work pants and a jacket 2 sizes too large. His hands were covered in mud up to the wrists. His beard was thicker than any previous photo, streaked with something dark. He moved slowly, deliberately, like someone carrying weight in his bones. He began to dig. No words at first, just the rhythm of motion, the shovel slicing into earth, the camera hissing with ambient sound, wind, breath, the occasional distant crack of tree limbs settling. Then he stopped and turned, not toward the camera, but slightly off to the side, to someone or something outside the frame. "I can't keep doing this," Ryker said. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "You said one, just one. And it would stop. But they keep coming. I buried the last one so deep the soil turned black." Silence. He dug again, harder now, his breathing ragged. "They don't even know. They think they're helping. They think I'm the one cleaning it up, but I'm just—" He broke off. "Drop the shovel. I didn't ask for this." Then something curious. He knelt at the edge of the hole, ran his fingers across the dirt like he was touching a wound, or maybe closing a chapter. "You can't bury what's still listening," he said, and laughed. Not a madman's laugh, not quite. More like a man who had realized too late that the rules had never been his to begin with. The camera cut sharply. No ending. Just the sudden snap of silence and blank screen. The footage was authenticated. There was no evidence of tampering. It was Alan Ryker, alive. Speaking to someone unseen, digging again, and maybe not for the first time. Whatever he had uncovered back in Black Ridge hadn't let him go. It had followed him into the dirt, into the woods, into the quiet corners of a junkyard full of broken things. And the man who had once held the line between order and chaos now looked like someone who had crossed into the gray space in between. The kind of place where things disappear and sometimes return. The Plymouth Fury was supposed to be a tomb, left to rot under layers of rust and rainfall, buried beneath a graveyard of other forgotten machines. But when forensic analysts began to dismantle the car piece by corroded piece, they uncovered a different story. The kind that doesn't fade with time, but lingers just beneath the surface, waiting for the right hands to peel it open. At first glance, the car was textbook decay. Corrosion along the wheel wells, vinyl interior peeled back in long curls, the stench of mildew embedded into the upholstery. The tires had long collapsed under their own weight. The frame bore the orange-brown pockmarks of time and neglect. But then came the details, the inconsistencies that didn't belong. The engine block, though outwardly rusted, had been oiled. Recently, not factory fluid, but fresh. The filter had been replaced within the last few years. The gas tank, drained dry on discovery, bore the faint chemical scent of stabilizer, something poured in deliberately to preserve the remaining fuel. Even the battery mount had been cleaned, its connectors cleared of corrosion. None of it made sense for a vehicle supposedly untouched since 2014. Further inspection revealed more. The undercarriage, when scraped clean, showed patches of newer metal welded into place. The bolts on the rear axle had been torqued in the last 18 months. Someone had not only kept the car intact, they had maintained it, carefully, secretly. It wasn't until the lab ran a latent print sweep that the story fractured open. On the inside of the trunk lid, smudged just above the lock mechanism, were 4 partial fingerprints. 2 were unreadable. One matched Jonah Harlan, the man found curled inside. But the 4th, clean, distinct, fresh, belonged to Alan Ryker. Not from old records, not from his academy file or his service weapon logs. Fresh, left there within the last year. It was impossible, or should have been. But the ridge detail didn't lie. The oil and sweat left behind didn't lie. Alan Ryker had returned to that car. Not once, but possibly multiple times. He had opened the trunk. He had touched it. Maybe he had even placed something inside. Maybe he had taken something out. The idea that Ryker had been alive for years, operating in the margins of the investigation, circling the scene of the original crime, sent a ripple through the case files. Suddenly, timelines didn't align. Suddenly, the idea of a clean disappearance seemed naive. Security footage from nearby gas stations and traffic cams was scrubbed again. A man matching Ryker's build and gait was spotted on 2 separate cameras near Black Ridge in 2019 and again in 2021. The footage had been dismissed before as poor quality ghost sightings, the kind that haunted any cold case. But now, with the fingerprint, they demanded reevaluation. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Was Ryker hiding? Was he being forced to maintain the car, to protect its secret? Or had he become something else entirely, no longer an investigator, but a silent curator of a truth too heavy to expose? What disturbed investigators most was not the fact that he had returned, but that he had done so without ever being seen, without alerting anyone, without making a sound. He had slipped back into the trunk of time, into the place where all lost things are kept: cars, witnesses, journals, men. And in doing so, he had left behind a single print, a quiet admission that he had not vanished, not truly. He had simply stepped out of reach. And now, the door was cracked open again. It arrived on a Monday morning, folded once and slipped into an unmarked envelope. No return address, no stamp. Just a blank envelope, hand-delivered to Claire Ryker's mailbox. The ink on the paper was faded, like it had been written days or weeks earlier and left waiting for the right or wrong moment to be sent. No signature, no date. Just 5 lines, printed in uneven block letters that bore the subtle tremor of a shaking hand. I couldn't bring them back. I buried what I could. I am tired. I am sorry. Claire read it once, then again, then folded it and placed it on the kitchen table, as if it might continue speaking if left alone. She didn't need a name. She knew the handwriting. She had memorized it through grocery lists and birthday cards and notes left on the bathroom mirror. Alan had never been one for long sentences. His truth had always lived in fragments. The letter had arrived just 4 days before the Plymouth Fury was uncovered in the junkyard. 4 days before Jonah Harlan's body was found curled in the trunk, and the old bones of the Black Ridge mystery stirred to life again. Claire didn't mention the letter at first. She wasn't sure if it was real, wasn't sure if she believed in anything anymore. But something about those 5 lines sat in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. The words weren't meant for the public. They weren't part of a grand reveal or explanation. They didn't unlock the case or offer evidence. They were personal, quiet, almost childlike in their simplicity. The voice of a man who had run out of language, of time, of hope. Investigators analyzed the letter when Claire finally handed it over. The envelope showed no prints, no DNA. The paper had been handled carefully, likely with gloves. The ink matched a common ballpoint brand. The mail carrier had no memory of delivering it. Surveillance footage from the post office yielded nothing useful. If it had come from Alan Ryker, as everyone now suspected, he had ensured it would leave no trace. And yet the message was a trace. A final breadcrumb. A confession not of guilt, perhaps, but of failure. Ryker had been chasing something in Black Ridge. Something tied to the disappearances, the house, the well, the buried past that refused to stay buried. He had tried to stop it, or slow it, or understand it. But in the end, he had only managed to cover the wounds, not heal them. I couldn't bring them back. Those 5 words carried more weight than a full deposition. They echoed with loss, with regret, with the realization that some things, once taken, are gone forever. The letter wasn't a solution. It was a surrender. To Claire, it was both a comfort and a new wound. Proof that he had lived beyond the night he vanished. Proof that he had tried. And, in the end, proof that he still thought of her, that he still saw her as the person who needed to know, even if the world didn't. I buried what I could. The line could be taken literally. The bodies, the evidence, the past. Or maybe it meant something deeper. The memories. The man he used to be. The part of himself that couldn't live with what he had seen. The letter was catalogued and filed, but Claire kept a copy, folded it into the same shoebox where she kept his watch, his badge, and the last photo of him smiling barely, but enough. She never cried over it. Not once. But every morning since, she's found herself staring out the window at the horizon, waiting for footsteps that never come, and whispering 5 words back into the silence. I know. I forgive you. There are 2 kinds of disappearances. The kind where someone is taken, and the kind where someone chooses to walk away. Alan Ryker may have done both, once by force, the second by will. And in the end, both acts left the same cold void behind questions without answers, truths half-formed, like breath on glass that never quite clears. He left behind fragments. A scorched journal. A fingerprint in rust. A Polaroid photo curled at the edges. A shovel caught in the grainy eye of an old camera. A letter with 5 broken lines of regret. And a body, finally uncovered, years after it should have been mourned. These are the things he gave us, pieces of a puzzle that, when arranged, still don't fit. As if the picture was never meant to be solved, only felt. If Ryker uncovered a network of killings, of cover-ups, and patterns hidden beneath the moss-thick surface of Black Ridge, it came at the cost of his identity, his name, his place in the world. He became untethered, a man no longer belonging to any timeline, not fully dead, not fully alive, ghosting between evidence and myth. Some believe he was protecting someone, that his silence was not fear, but sacrifice. Maybe Claire. Maybe his son, who had returned quietly to town the year before the body was found, living under a different name, just miles from the junkyard. No one ever confirmed it, but there were sightings. Glimpses. A man who looked like Ryker, always walking alone, always just out of reach. Others think he was hunted. Not by men, but by the thing that lived inside the land, the pattern of taking, the rhythm of loss that echoed across decades. The house, the well. The hush that fell over the town after every disappearance, like the trees themselves conspired to swallow the screams. Maybe Ryker stepped into that rhythm, thinking he could break it. Maybe he fed it instead. Or maybe guilt drove him underground. For failing the Holloways, for losing Jonah, for the child years ago, whose red mitten still haunted his dreams. Perhaps every shovel of dirt he moved in the woods was penance. Perhaps he believed silence was the only justice left. The truth is this: Ryker never really left Black Ridge. Even when he vanished, he remained folded into the story like a watermark in the paper. His absence shaped everything. Investigators built theories around the hole he left behind. Claire lived in the hollow of his last words. The town breathed more carefully, as if afraid to draw attention from whatever had swallowed him once and might do so again. And then he left again. Not into the woods, not into the rain, but into the long, soft blur of memory. The kind that turns facts into folklore. People speak his name now with hesitation, not out of fear, but reverence. As if Ryker became something bigger than a man. A warning, a witness, a wound. Old film warps when it ages. The colors distort, faces blur, edges burn away. But the feeling remains. You can still sense the heartbeat of the scene, flickering behind the imperfections. That's what Ryker became. A flicker, a feeling. A man whose life was rendered in static and silence, whose truth might never come into perfect focus. But for those who knew him, for those who still remember the shape of his absence, there is one thing that remains clear. He didn't run. He returned. And then, when he had done all he could, when the weight became too much to carry, he walked away again, not to escape, but to disappear in the only way left to him. Not as a mystery, but as a man,